Okay, so we derived the money demand curve, and this is just how much money do you want to hold. And when we think money, we think how much do you want to have in your checking account balances, right? How much checking account do you want? And we're thinking of the nominal interest rate as the price of money. It's what you have to give up if you hold your wealth in a liquid form rather than something that pays you interest, right? So you're giving up that interest to hold it in a liquid form in your checking account balances. And so the higher the nominal interest rate, the less money you want to hold, and the lower the nominal interest rate, the more money you want to hold. Okay. And then we talked briefly about a couple of things that are going to shift this money demand curve. And this is it's not really changing anyone's decision-making process. It's just we're only graphing things in 2 dimensions. And there's lots of things that people care about. So if any of the other things that people care about change, that's going to shift this curve because we've restricted ourselves to 2 dimensions. And the particular ones that we're going to pay attention to in this class are if you get richer, if the country gets richer, they want to buy more stuff. Money is the thing that makes buying stuff easier. And so they're going to want to hold more money at any given interest rate. If prices go up, things become more expensive, then it takes more money to buy stuff. If you want to buy things, you need to hold more money. So at the same level of interest rate, you're going to hold more money. Okay? And vice versa, if the price level goes down, you're going to want to hold less money. Okay, so that's where we are. We got the money demand. Now we want to talk about money supply because it's economics. So there's going to be a line down, there's going to be a line up, and there's going to be a magic point where they cross. It's almost always the way. And here we've got a line going down, so we're halfway there. Now we need the line going up. Now this so far has been pretty normal. There's this little bit of weirdness about thinking about the interest rate as the price of money. But once you get over that, it's just normal everyday demand that you've seen before. But money supply is a bit different. So it's going to turn out that the banking system kind of creates money, not even kind of, like it creates money. And we're going to make institutions that are in control of the money supply. So we're sort of, as a preview, we're going to make institutions, and we have made institutions called central banks, whose job is partly to regulate the banking system and partly to control the amount of money that's in the economy, making more money in the economy, less money in the economy. And these institutions we've made semi-separate from governments. And the reason is governments always have needs to print money, right? There's always you want the seigniorage from printing money. And so there is a tendency to want to cause inflation, right? If you print lots of money, you're going to have inflation. And so to keep that incentive in check, we've sort of separated central banks out to be separate institutions. So what we want to see here is how they increase the money supply and how they decrease the money supply. Okay. All right, well, we had that about banks. We had that about banks too. Okay, suppose that we wanted to increase the money supply, right? And I have got the printing press. I'm able to print euros, and my goal is not really to print euros and spend it, but is to just increase the supply of money in the economy. Now, what I can do is I can mint a coin, €1 coin, and I need to get that money into the economy, right? I've got it in my hand. I'm not the economy. I'm just some putsy central banker. And so I need to somehow get it into the economy. And there's lots of ways that I could do this. But since I only have the €1, how I'm going to do it is I'm going to take it, I'm going to go down to O'Connell Street, and I'm just going to toss it out there into the economy. And now I have injected €1 into the economy, right? Clearly, there's now more €1 out there than there was before, right? Because I newly minted it, waited for it to cool down, tossed it out on the street. Now, the key thing to notice here is that the total money supply is going to go up by more than €1. I only tossed €1 out there, but the money supply is going to go up by more than €1. And this is because of how we redefined money to include checking account balances and to be primarily checking account balances. So what happens? Well, the first thing that happens is I toss this thing out and it gets scooped up by Joe. And now Joe has €1. My supply of money is higher, is what he says. And people look at him like he's weird, but Joe, that's just him. Okay. And that's fine. Money supply has indeed gone up by €1. But what happens then? Well, then Joe is going to deposit a portion of this into his bank, right? Maybe it's 100% of it that he's going to put into his bank. Maybe it's maybe it's a fraction of this, but on average, an average person who has another euro, a lot of that euro is going to end up in the bank, right? And then that's fine. Then he says, I have 20 cents in cash and I've got 80 cents in the bank. He still has an extra euro, right? Nothing has changed. He just put it in the bank because we said bank account balances are money. So when he puts it into the bank, it didn't change the money supply at all. It just went into the bank. Okay. But then the bank is going to take that money and it's going to loan a portion of it out. Right? It's going to loan a portion to Carl. So here's 1 minus RR. You can see reserve requirement, for instance. 1 minus RR of that is going to be loaned out to Carl. And so we can think, let's call this thing 1 minus C, or 1 minus RR. This is the portion that of this original euro that ends up loaned out. Right? Some of it gets lost because he doesn't deposit it in the bank. Some of it gets lost because the bank doesn't loan out everything. It has to keep a portion of reserves. But some fraction is going to be loaned out. And we can think, say, 10% is going to 90%, like probably somewhere like 10% is going to sort of disappear, right? He's going to either keep it in cash, get lost behind his couch or whatever, and then the bank's not going to loan out everything that he deposits. But now this 90 cents, call it A, is going to be loaned to Carl, right? And Carl's going to have his little project, and he's going to borrow money for that project, and now he's got cash, right? He's got 90 cents. Joe still has a whole euro, right? Because Joe has the 10 cents, he's got the 5 cents that he still has under his mattress, and he's got the 95 cents that he deposited in the bank. So he still has a whole euro. He's got the cash and he's got his bank account balances. And this is because we are calling bank account balances money, right? Which is different from English, but nevertheless, we're calling them money. And so he's got his wealth in the bank. It's just to make it simple, we'll assume he puts all of it in the bank. Make this CR0. Right? So he puts all of it in the bank, and the bank loans a portion of it out. So he's got his money in the bank and the whole euro. Right? He put it in the bank. He put a euro in the bank. He's got a whole euro. But also at the same time, Carl has 90 cents. So now the money supply is Joe's 1 euro plus Carl's 90 cents. So I only took 1 euro and I threw it into the economy, but already I've almost doubled that amount. So it's now up to 1 euro 90 cents. But of course, it doesn't stop here, right? Carl's going to deposit some of it. Let's say he deposits all of it in his bank. And then the bank's going to loan some of that to Sarah. And so A times A, so 0.9 times 0.9, 81 cents is going to be loaned to Sarah. Right? So now Joe's got a euro in the bank. Carl's got 90 cents in the bank. And Sarah's got 81 cents in cash. Right? And so the total money supply has gone up by over 2 at this point. And so on and so on. So if we put just 1 euro into the money into the system, and the money supply went up by, well, the total change in M is the 1 that Joe has, plus the A that Carl has, plus the A squared that Sarah has, plus A cubed, plus A to the 4th, plus A to the 5th, plus A to the 6th, and so on. We can factor that out, put all the A terms together, and then take an A out of that. So A times 1 is this A times A is this A squared, A times A squared is this A cubed, and so on. And then we notice that this thing in the parentheses looks just like our original thing. So instead of writing that, we can write the change in M, like so. And then we just solve for change in M. Put it on the left-hand side, we get 1 minus A times the change in M equals 1. And the change in M is equal to 1 over 1 minus A. We've seen this math before in the multiplier. This is sort of the central feature of macroeconomics, that the things that a person does is a little different from the things that the economy does altogether. Right? Before it was, I spent some money, you felt rich, so you spent some money. Someone else felt rich, they spent some money. And that was where we got our government spending multiplier. Exactly the same math, but it was that sort of story. Here it's, I get a euro, some of it gets loaned to you, now you have money, some of that gets loaned to somebody else, they have money, and so on. The upshot is, though, that the money supply has gone up by a lot more than a euro. It's gone up by 1 over 1 minus A, right? And if we keep our little example of A is equal to 0.9, the change in M is equal to 1 over 1 minus 0.9 is equal to 1 over 0.1 is equal to 10. So the total money supply would go up by 10 euros in this case, when I put 1 euro into the economy. Okay. Now, you may be shocked to hear, but this has a name, and I bet you could even guess the name. It's going to be called the money multiplier because it's multiplying, right? So if we put 1 euro into the economy, the money supply goes up by 10 times that in this particular example. Again, it's pointless to memorize the formula. You will find that there's a different formula in the book. We'll explain that in a second, but it's just the money multiplier. And so what this means is that the central bank, if it wants to increase or decrease the money supply, it only has to do a little bit, and there's going to be a big effect. All I need to do is put in 1 euro into the economy physically, and I get 10 euros of change in the total amount of money that's out there. Okay. So we institute these. So you can see just from this money multiplier that the banking system is hugely important for the amount of money that's out there, right? The coin was 1 and the total effect was 10. So the 9 of that happened in the banking system and only 1 of that happened with the physical coin, right? And this is really important that we defined money to include the banking system. Right? Which means that the banking system is going to be terribly important for the money supply, and therefore, if we want to control the money supply, we really need to be focused on the banking system, which is why we're here doing all this stuff with the banking system, because the banking system is central to how much money is in the economy. And so we have these institutions, central banks, and they've got 2 roles. One is to regulate the banking system. Now, in Ireland, we have several institutions, the financial regulators involved in the banking system, and the central bank is involved in the banking system. And their second role is, and that's because the banking system is all about money, and if the banking system falls apart, the money supply is going to go way down. So you can't do one without the other. You have to be aware of the banking system to do the job of controlling the money supply. So it's natural to make them the regulators of it. And the second is to control the money supply. So now we want to see how they actually control the money supply. Right. So the version that we have here, the version of this money multiplier is going to be actually a little different. The formula is a little different from what you have in the book. And that's because here I went and I took a euro coin and I tossed it out in the street. Whereas in the book, they're a lot more realistic. As Ben Bernanke, he wouldn't do an unrealistic central bank, even though it's easier to understand that way. What they do in practice is instead of taking a physical coin and throw it out there, they get money into somebody's bank account, and we'll see how. Okay, which means that the initial bit is a bit different. Right? So the initial step is different, but the idea of the money multiplier is exactly the same. And you can answer questions about if this changed, if the reserve requirement went up, would the money multiplier be bigger or smaller? You can answer that with this sort of thing. Okay, so this is the way to think about it, but it's not exactly realistic about how they inject money into the banking system. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay, so in order to control the money supply, we need to be able to do 2 things. We need to be able to increase the money supply whenever we want, and we need to be able to decrease the money supply whatever they want. It's the process of elimination. I've covered them. And we need to be able to keep the money supply the same whatever we want, obviously. So we need to have control over the money supply, and we need to be able to increase it. We need to be able to decrease it. So we want to see how we would go about doing those 2 things. And we'll start out with increasing. How do we increase the money supply? Okay, so how do we increase the money supply? So the first key is that you need to give the central bank power to control the number of notes and coins in there. Now, in real life, this gets complicated. The central bank, our central bank, which is the European Central Bank, not the Irish Central Bank. Our Irish Central Bank is not a central bank. It was all the central bank properties were sort of devolved off to Frankfurt when they created the euro. But it does some banking regulation stuff. So the central bank in Frankfurt is given the power to decide how many euros in there. They got a big printing press. They can print off euros, so they can make more euros physically. Okay. Now, it gets a little complicated because central banks are institutions that typically happened in the historical distant past. So, for example, the U.S. Central Bank is a weird institution that isn't owned by the government, but is actually owned by the banks, the commercial banks themselves, but is somehow still controlled by the government. And there they don't have powers to control, to actually print US dollars, but they have a cozy agreement with the Treasury. So it gets complicated, but fundamentally, you need either directly or indirectly to have the ability to print off currency. Okay, and the US central bank has that. It's indirect and it's institutionally convoluted, but in fact, they can increase the number of dollars in the economy, decrease the number of dollars. So just for simplicity, and like our central bank in Frankfurt, they have a printing press. They can print off euros whenever they want. So that's great. So if you want to increase the money supply, just print off some euros and get them into the economy. Right? That's just like I did with my euro, tossing it down O'Connell Street. Right? You can do that. Okay? So what is the best way to get these euros that we just printed into people's hands? Well, there's a lot of ways we could do them. We could say, I haven't had the right idea. Just toss it down O'Connell Street. And we could have a big helicopter. We could fill it full of notes with one of those big nets that you see on the TV, and we could just drop them on O'Connell Street. And that would absolutely totally work. In exactly the same way as me throwing a euro down O'Connell Street would absolutely totally work. Except if we all heard, like right now, it came through, somebody's watching TV on their computer and they hear the central bank is dropping 100 billion euros on O'Connell Street. Well, you might be a good student and want to stay, but you'd have no teacher because I'd be buggering down to O'Connell Street to pick up the money. So we'd all go out there and we'd be elbowing grandmas and there'd be mayhem and there'd be blood on the street. And so we don't do it this way because those grandmas are vicious and they'll beat us all to a pulp for that money. And so we don't do it this way because it would cause absolute mayhem. But I want you to be clear that we could do it this way other than the absolute mayhem that it would cause. It's really just a problem of how do we get this cash into people's hands? We've printed the cash. We can drop it on O'Connell Street and that would do the job, other than the fact that we would all kill each other and all work in Dublin would stop for weeks, right? Okay. So we don't do that just because it's ridiculous, but it is possible to do it that way, right? Okay. Another thing we could do is we could say, okay, that's a mayhem, but maybe we should just have a lottery. And we say, we have 100 billion euros. Everyone pick a number. Whoever gets the number, they get 100 billion euros. And this would absolutely work too. It would bound to go to a heart surgeon who would just stop surgery that day. And it would be ideally it would go to an economics professor, then everyone would go free and it would be great for everyone concerned. But no, it would go to a heart surgeon and the heart surgery wouldn't get done. It's distortion as well, but this would work as well. We would just lottery it off to somebody. The problem with that is we don't know what they're going to do with the money. Like it's very idiosyncratic, right? It depends on the guy who gets the money, what gets done with it. So we don't have a real clear prediction about what's going to happen to the money after that. Well, you just take it off to Belize or what, who knows? It depends on the guy, but it would work too. Okay. So what we do instead of all this is we just buy something. Okay. And if we buy something, we print off all this money, the central bank gives you some money, and you give the central bank something. Look, the money is now in the economy. The central bank has the something, and you've got the money. And you put it in the bank, and they loan it out, and you put it in the bank, and they loan it out, and the whole money multiplier thing takes off. Okay. So this is what we do in practice, and we do this because it's kind of neat and clean, and we buy lots of little somethings, so it's spread out. So it's not just one guy deciding on what's going to happen to it all, but it sort of averages out with the law of large numbers and all of that. And so, great, we buy something. Which, of course, asks, what the heck should we buy? And we could buy anything. We could buy movie tickets. We could go out and we say, central bankers like a good movie. Not so much superhero movies, but other movies, because it makes them feel inadequate. But they like a movie, and so we could just say, okay, we want to get 100 million out into the economy. Let's start going to the movies, and all the central bankers can go out to the movies. Okay? And then the movies would show them stuff, and that money would go into the economy, and everything would be great. Now we don't do this because, first of all, it is not easy to buy 100 million euros worth of movie tickets. Right? It's a problem. And secondly, if we were doing that all the time, it would totally distort the movie industry. We would start having a lot more movies like The Big Short and a lot less movies like The Avengers, right? Because they like the financial stuff, these wackos. And so the movie industry would start catering to these €100 million injections of money, and it would start catering to central bankers. Central bankers would have to buy out theaters, and no one would be allowed to go in the theater, just be an empty theater because there's not that many central bankers. It would just totally screw up the movie industry. So we don't do this just because it would screw things up. Okay? But we could. It's important to notice at this point that by and large, we are trying to increase the money supply because, knock on wood, but typically the economy is growing. And so there's more and more stuff being produced. And so we need more and more money to sort of keep prices just the same, right? And so, as the economy grows, hopefully, we want more money in the economy. As population grows, we want more money in the economy. So the typical thing to do is to have a little bit more money in the economy each year. And in fact, they usually target something like 2% inflation. And so we want increase in the money supply anyway. We'll get to why that is. But so typically on a typical day, they're injecting money in the economy. So they would be buying movie tickets. And so you go to the movies and a lot of the seats would always be empty because the central bankers brought them up. Okay. So we don't do that. We could buy real estate, and that's a nice way, because if you have 100 million euros, the sort of quick way to buy, a lot of stuff is to buy something of high value. So we could buy commercial real estate, 50 million here, 60 million there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. And that would work too, right? Because central bank would get the building, and people would get the money. People who used to own the building would get the money, and they would put it in the bank, and it'd be loaned out and put in the bank and loaned out, and the whole money multiplier thing would kick off. So that would work as well. Okay. Now, I used to put this on here. This was back in the day. I used to put this on here, and I make fun of it for a while, just like I do with the movie tickets. But in fact, they've started doing this quite a lot. The reason we don't do this is because it distorts the real estate industry, right? And because we're buying, typically, we are increasing the money supply every year. That means that over time, eventually, the central bank would own all of Europe's real estate, because they're buying every year. And so they got more and more and more. And eventually they would just be a real estate monopoly owning all the buildings in Europe, okay? Which is not what we set out to do. It's great for them. But then it becomes slumlords. And all of a sudden, central bankers need to know how to unclog toilets, which is something that they don't know how to do. And so they don't want to get involved in that. It's a mess, right? You have to have renters, and my house is infested. Could you please get the bugs out of my house? And it's like a whole nightmare they don't want to be involved in. And secondly, we didn't want to, by the sly, sort of institute sort of a communist sort of situation where the government owns the means of production, right? Which is, producing real estate stuff, right? So our goal wasn't to have the government own all the stuff in the economy, right? Might be a good idea, might be a bad idea, but that wasn't what we set out to do. We just wanted to increase the money supply. And now our little system is having the central bank, in the end, owning all the real estate of Europe, which is not our goal. So we don't buy real estate for this reason. These days, or at least in the last 10, 15 years, the central bank has been buying a lot of real estate. They never used to do this, but they're doing it for a different reason. They're doing it because they think, here's a couple of companies that I think are first of all, in trouble. And I think if those companies go under, they're going to bring down a lot of other perfectly good companies with them. They're systemically intertwined with the economy. And they think, for better or worse, they think these particular companies, if they go under, it's going to cause grave damage to the economy as a whole. And so they're trying to help out those particular companies. And so they go and they buy something that company owns, typically real estate. So central banks have been buying up a lot of shopping malls for the last 10, 15 years, because shopping malls are something that have been doing badly by and large. And so a lot of companies have these shopping malls. And if it's one of these companies that's identified as a systemic risk to the economy, that's a nice non-performing thing to take off their books. The central bank now owns a shopping mall that nobody wants to shop at. And those people have money, which they put in the bank, gets loaned out, put in the bank, gets loaned out, and so on. So we actually do buy real estate these days, but it is not the general thing. It's really to help some specific guy out, which is kind of sleazy, but kind of what they're doing. Okay. Another thing we could do is we could buy stocks. That is, stocks are part ownership in companies. We could do this, but again, what's going to happen is it's less distortionary. You don't have to like deal with toilets or anything, but it still has the problem that in the end, you end up owning all the companies, right? And then we have, through the back door, a communist sort of system where the government owns all the means of production, all the companies, right? Maybe a good idea, maybe not, but wasn't the goal. And so we don't buy stocks. So what we buy instead is government bonds. Okay? Government bonds are just IOUs from the government. The government wants to borrow money. It says, writes a little slip saying, I owe you 10,000 euros, and they sell that slip to people. And that's a government bond. And then we can trade that slip around. And at the end of the year, whoever's holding that slip gets 10,000 euros from the government. So it's just an IOU, just like if you wrote an IOU to anyone else. It's exactly the same thing. But they buy government bonds. So they buy government debt. And this is how this works is first of all, they're typically buying government bonds. So they're buying these government bonds. So they have a stack of government bonds and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger each day. And every once in a while, the government pays back its loans and they get their 10,000 euros for each of those. And then they don't have government bonds, they have cash, and then they can just burn the cash, right? Because, you know, it's just money. They can print more. They got the printing press. Okay? Or they'll give the money back to the government. Right? Now, they don't buy these government bonds directly from the government. They buy them from people like you or me, or more likely pension funds and insurance companies and stuff like that. So they go and they buy them on the open market. So the government, when the government wants to borrow money, they say, let me write up a bunch of these IOUs, and I will go to the market and I'll see who wants to buy these IOUs. And who buys them? Insurance companies, pension funds, or you and me. Like if you have 10,000 euros, you can buy one. Right? You can buy one tomorrow. You just go out and you buy one. You got a little certificate saying the government owes you money. Okay? It might have complicated terms. It might have simple terms, but it's just a slip of saying that they're going to pay you this schedule of money over this amount of time. Okay? And then you can hold on to that for a while. And so no central bank was involved here. And then you can hold on to that for a while. And then you can say, well, you know, I loaned them 10,000 euros and it'd be great when I get paid back, but actually I would like to have the cash now. And so then you can go to the open market and you can sell that on to somebody else. And anyone can buy that. It could be it could be a pension fund, it could be an investment bank, it could be whoever, but it can also be the central bank can come and buy it from you. So they'll never buy it directly from the government, but they will buy it from the secondary market, the open market. Just Okay, so what we do is we print euro notes and buy government bonds. Now, in practice, we skip the printing stage and we just buy it directly through a bank transfer because they're in control of the banking system, so they can make up as much money as they want. But it's effectively the same as printing the euro notes. The ability to print the euro notes is what allows them to make a direct bank transfer. Okay, and we buy the government bonds. And that's called, unsurprisingly, an open market purchase because we're purchasing them from the open market, from pension funds, from insurance companies. This is primarily who we're buying them from. And then, of course, you, as a pension fund, I know you're a pension fund in your spare time, you had all this government debt. The government owed you a whole lot of money. You said, I would like to have my cash now instead of the government owing it me in 10 years. And so you sold it, right? And now you've got cash. You sold it to me, the central bank. I gave you cash in your bank account. I put money in your bank account. You gave me the bonds. I stick them on my stack of bonds. Well, eventually, the government will pay me back. Now the government owes the central bank money. Okay? Government doesn't care. They owe the money either way. Government now owes me the money, and you've got cash in your bank account, right? The bank keeps some of that in reserve and loans the rest of it out. That person puts it in the bank, gets loaned out again. And so if I buy 100 million worth of bonds, it's actually going to affect the money supply by 10 times that, say, in our little example. So $1 billion. Okay. So that's how we increase the money supply, open market purchases. We can buy anything, and sometimes we do, but almost always it's government bonds, because that causes the least distortion in the economy. It becomes more or less just playing around in the financial system rather than playing around in anything real. So we're not doing real distortions. we do cause distortions through the financial system. When we do this, it will change the interest rate, which will affect things. But we can use that as a tool. Whereas if we're thinking about, we're playing around in the real estate market, we cause real distortions in the economy when we do this, and that's more of a problem. But we also need to be able to decrease the money supply. And this is the same kind of idea, except it's slightly harder. Because now, instead of giving people money, I need to take money away from them. And you may have tried to take money away from people in your life. I don't know what kind of criminal activities you get up to in your spare time, but it's a job to get them to give up their money, right? You have to threaten them with a gun. It's like a whole thing. And so the central bank has the same problem, right? They got to get us to give up our money so that they can decrease the money supply. But we're all picky about it. I don't know, very spoiled. So we don't really want to give up our money. So they have to get some way to get us to give up our money. Okay? So how can they do this? One, they could point a gun at us. As my method, I came to genius. Point a gun at us and say, give me your money or else. Okay? And this sounds ridiculous, but it's not actually, right? This is the way taxes work, right? The government says you have to pay income taxes. And if you don't, they're going to send a couple of nice guys around in suits and say, look, come on, man, just pay your taxes. And you'll say, and they'll go away. And then a couple of guardies will come and they say, look, man, you really got to pay your taxes. And you'll say, go away, pig. And then they'll go away. And then some more guardies will come and these guys will have guns, right? So taxes are charged with gunpoint. Okay? Not directly. So you could do this. You could just say, look, we decided the money supply has to be smaller. Give me 10,000 euros. And if you don't, you go to jail, right? And this would, in fact, work. It's kind of different from taxes, though. And we're kind of okay with them pointing the guns at us for the taxes. Because in our heart of hearts, we know someone's got to pay for the fire department, and someone's got to pay for the nurses in the hospitals, and someone's got to pay the road. And yeah, I wish it wasn't me. But, you know, as a society, yeah, we kind of gotta. And so when they come and they ask for their taxes, I bitch and moan about it. I try to get out of them. But in the end, you know, you kind of feel like, yeah, it's a reasonable thing for them to be doing. Now, you're not thrilled, obviously, but it's kind of a reasonable thing for them to be doing. And for society to work as sort of the social contract, we realize, yeah, somebody somewhere's got to pay their taxes. And so we don't feel that it's theft in the same way, right? It's unpleasant and we don't like it, but it's not immoral for them to come and do this. Right? It's part of living in a society. On the other hand, if a bunch of unelected central bankers just sitting in Frankfurt said, you know, I think you should give it just on a whim. Like they don't even have to justify themselves. And they say, you don't even know the guy's name. And he says, I think you should give me 10,000 euros. This doesn't have the same thing. Like who put him in charge and who gave him the authority to put me in jail if I don't give him 10,000 euros, right? We wouldn't have the same acceptance of this as a reasonable thing. Right? And so they don't do it this way because, in fact, not because it's impractical, but because that would be the end of central banks. We would not put up with that crap, right? Because it's reasonable for taxes to pay for government services. It feels a lot less reasonable when it's just the whim of a couple of investment bankers who got appointed to the central bank, right? It just feels creepy and weird. So we don't do that. Okay? Another thing they could do is, remember, they're in charge of the banking system. So they could say, okay, we won't need 10,000 euros. Fine, just take it out of Ivan's bank account. Woohoo! We got it now. And that would absolutely work because they're in control of the banking system. They could just take it out of my bank account and done. Woo! Or whoever's banking account they wanted. All of us could pay 1,000 euros. Good times. Okay? And that would absolutely work, but it would only work once, right? Because as soon as they did that once, we would say, oh, I'm not putting my money in the bank again, right? Because it fooled me once, okay, but the second time, no, I'm keeping all my wealth under my mattress now, right? And everyone would take their money out of the bank because banks aren't safe. The central bank just steals it whenever they want. And so all of a sudden, the whole banking system is destroyed. We don't have a banking system in Europe if they do that even once, because no one will put their money in the bank after that, right? And so they don't do this, not because it's impractical, but because the banking system is a good thing that has these nice features. It takes lots of small deposits and it puts it to useful work, buying people houses, buying factories and whatnot. right? And so we want there to be a banking system. And so we don't do it this way because, first of all, it's only a one-shot thing. And secondly, because it ruins something good. So we don't do that, but they could do that. And so what they have to do in practice is they need us to part with it voluntarily. They need us to just give it up. And so they have to sell something. Right? And you may have a clue what they're going to sell, but I'm going to go through a bunch of silly stuff first. What do they sell? They could sell massages. They could go out in the street and they say a massage from a genuine central banker, head of research, can give you a massage. Lovely. This, first of all, there's very tired central banker fingers, and that's hard on them, but you know, they get paid well, so screw them. Let them have tired fingers. I don't care. But more importantly, nobody wants a massage from a central banker. So that doesn't really fly. You can't really get enough. And of course, it doesn't scale. You can't do 100 million overnight doing massages. So they don't do that. They could, of course, sell real estate, but if they have a limited amount. And of course, we have this distorts thing. And also, real estate takes a while to sell. Right? Even if you have 100 million worth of building, it takes a while to find a buyer for it. And so you can't just change the money supply overnight. Okay? Again, we could do stocks, but we don't. We do government bonds because they've been typically buying government bonds. So they got this giant stack of government bonds just sitting there. So if they want to sell something, they sell these government bonds. Okay? And they sell them on the open market. And this is going to be a shock to everyone. This is called an open market sale. Yeah. So what we do is we sell the government bonds. So I got this giant stack of government bonds. I say, hey, who wants a government bond? The Irish government will owe you money. It'll be great. And someone says, yeah, I'll pay $5,000 for it. And I give them the bond. Now the government owes them money. And I get their $5,000, which I burn or shred. Actually, typically I shred and then burn it. So I get their cash and I burn it. And people, oh no, they're burning hundreds of million zeros, and they are. But you know, they got the printing press; they can print more. So there's just a pain to hold it around. So they burn it. Okay. That's an open market sale. Okay. And of course, the total decrease in the money supply will be much more than the value of the bonds, right? Because of the money multiplier. So when you buy the bonds from me, right, you take the money that's in your bank account and you buy the bonds from me, the central banker, right? And I just delete that line item. That money just disappeared into the ether. That's gone. And you now have, the government now owes you money. But now you have less money in your bank account, which means, remember, the bank, say, was keeping 10% in reserve. And now you have less deposits, right? And so now, let's see. So they were keeping, let's say you had your 10,000 in the bank account, right? And they were keeping 1,000 in reserves for that. So they had 1,000 cash. And so now you've taken your money out. They had to give your 1,000 that they had in reserve plus 9,000 in reserves that they were keeping for somebody else's money, right? And so now they don't have enough reserves, right? Because they had to use all their liquid assets to pay off when you took their money out, right? And so now they need to increase their reserves again. And so what they do is when people pay them back, they don't loan that money out. Right? And so until their reserves go back up. And so loans go down. And so the same money multiplier happens in reverse as people sort of call back their loans, and therefore there's just less money in the economy. And so it goes down by 10 times again. So if we wanted to start a central bank, like we're a government, we wanted to set up a central bank, we need to either directly or indirectly give them the power to print euros, right? So that they can increase the money supply and buy stuff. And we need to give them a starter pack of government bonds. Okay. Now, typically, they're going to be buying government bonds, so we don't need to keep giving them government bonds because typically they're increasing the money supply. And so typically that stack goes up and up and up until the bonds come due. But we need to give them a starter pack so they can decrease the money supply. And that's it. That's all we need. Okay. So what the upshot of this is that the central bank is just picking the money supply, right? If they want to increase the money supply, they buy stuff. If they want to decrease the money supply, they sell stuff. And the stuff they buy and sell is government bonds. Okay? And so they can pick any money supply they want. So if we're doing the money supply curve, it's really very simple. It's just, if this is the amount they want, this is going to work. This is the amount they want. Okay, this is not going to work. Fun times. This is the amount they want. It doesn't depend on the interest rate, just depends on whatever amount they want. So it's just a vertical line. That's the money supply. And if they want the money supply to be less, They sell stuff, take that money and burn it. If they want the money supply to go up, they buy stuff, creating money as they do so, and they can just shift this curve to the right and left. So, we have a line going down, a line going up, magic point where they cross, always in economics, 99% of the time. Here we have a very simple line going up. It's just straight vertical because it's whatever they want, whatever the whim gets into their cold little hearts, they can just increase the money supply or decrease the money supply at will, and they do. Okay. Now, I'll leave it there. Okay, so in equilibrium, we're going to have money supply equal money demand, just like we have demand for shoes equal supply of shoes. It's exactly the same thing. And so here we've got our money demand curve. And here we've got our money supply curve. And that is the equilibrium interest rate. Okay, there you go. Now, let me talk a little bit about interest rates while we're here. How are we doing? Yeah, a little bit about interest rates while we're here. We know in real life, here we've got the equilibrium interest rate. Now, we know real life isn't like that, right? In real life, if you try to buy a house, you're going to pay a low interest rate. If you try to buy a car, you're going to pay a higher interest rate, right? So there's all sorts of, on your Visa card, you get a different interest rate. And Hewlett Packard gets a different interest rate from you, gets a different interest rate from me. Like, it's a whole bunch of interest rates in the economy. And now we're just pretending like there's the interest rate. Now, we can think about this as sort of, like, if we want to pin it down, we can think about this as the interest rates that banks charge each other when they borrow money from each other. And banks borrow money from each other a lot, by the way. The way the banking system works is that you are required to, say, have 5% in reserves. And suppose you're coming up till the end of the week, and they balance these things every week. And so you have to report to the central bank, how much do you have in reserves at the end of the week? And you have to have your 5%. And then suppose that somebody just, took a lot of money out of the bank one day, right? A lot of people took money out of the bank, and now you don't have enough reserves because you gave out all that cash away to pay off the money they're taking out. And you're just short of reserves. Now, what you can do is you can go to other banks and you can borrow it over the weekend at this interbank rate. So some banks, people put money in and they had more reserves than they need. And so they can loan you that, and they can make a little bit of interest on the side, and you can avoid getting in trouble with the regulator, right? And so this happens all the time. And very occasionally, like, everybody took money out of all the banks, and lots of banks. There's not enough banks with extra money to make up for the banks without enough money. And then the banks have to go beg and plead with the central bank, say, please, we didn't do anything wrong. It just happened that way at the end of the week. We'll be better next week, honest. And the central bank will loan them the money to get through the week. But if they keep doing that over and over again, the central bank's going to have a cold, hard look at their books and maybe shut the bank down, right? So you can't do that all the time, but you can, in fact, do that, right? So we can think of this interest rate as the interest rate that the banks charge each other for these kinds of short-term loans, okay? And then we have something to pin it down, and it turns out that typically, not always, but typically, all the other interest rates tend to go along with that. If over a 6-month period, this interest rate is a lot higher, then it will typically be the case that they will charge us more on loans and so on. There's also another rate that the central bank loans to the banks, right? If you get at the end of the week and you're begging them, they say, okay, we'll loan you the money over the weekend, but we're going to charge you an interest rate on it. And there's an interest rate that they charge as well. That one can have either be very, very relaxed, nice, easy interest rate, or it can be punitive. Like they could charge you, like you've been screwing up week after week, now you got to pay extra. So we're not charging that one. We're really thinking the rate that the banks charge each other. And in our dark heart of hearts, and we're really simplifying the banking system a lot here, we're pretending that all the other interest rates in the economy kind of follow this. If this interest rate goes up, the interest rate on Visa cards that actual people are paying is going to go up as well. The interest rate on house loans is going to go up as well. And that's typically true, but it's not always true. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the banking literature and like a money and banking course about when that is not true. But it is very often true. And for the purposes of this class, we're going to pretend like it's true. That if the interest rate that banks charge each other goes up, the interest rate that you and I get charged from banks also goes up. Typically true, but be aware it's not always true. Okay, how are we doing? All right. So there it is. We got equilibrium in the money market. That is, we have this money demand curve, which is how much money people want to hold in their checking account balances. And we got this money supply curve, which is just picked out of the air by the central bank for whatever evil, nefarious purposes they've got in mind. They pick the money supply by doing these open market sales and purchases. Okay? And so if they wanted to, they could lower the interest rate, right? They lower the interest rate by increasing the money supply, and we'll go from point E to point F. And they do that, well, they need to increase the money supply, so they need to get money into our hands, so they need to buy stuff, right? Now, you will notice that I've been doing this for 30 years now. Oh my God, 30 years now. I have not memorized open market purchases and open market sales. I do not think it's worth the brain power to use it. You just need to think it through. They want more money into the economy, so they need to trade for that. They need to put money into the economy. They need to take something out, so they're buying something, right? And the thing that they're buying is government bonds. And so that's a purchase, right? It's just a simple, logical thing. If you want money into the economy, you need to buy something. If you want money out of the economy, you need to sell something so that somebody gives you the money. It's worth thinking about it that way. Otherwise, it becomes like a memorized thing where you have no understanding. I mean, you have understanding at the moment, but you know when you repeat it to yourself 40 times and you've memorized it, you kind of forget the understanding. It is worth, spending the 30 seconds just telling it to yourself. Like if you're buying something, where does the money go? Who's getting it? Where is the money now? Okay, so they can just buy stuff. That'll put money into the economy through the miracle of the money multiplier. That money supply will go up even more, and the interest rate will fall. Right? And we could obviously do the opposite. If we wanted to decrease the money supply, if we wanted to increase the interest rate, we could shift the curve to the left. So we would need to decrease the amount of money in the economy. So we would need to get people to give money up. So we would need to sell something, right? And so we would do an open market sale, and we would shift the curve to the left, and we would get a higher interest rate. And so this interest rate and the money supply are really the same sort of thing. Given the money demand curve, we can pick any money supply we want, and that will determine the interest rate. And so in effect, we go back, we can pick any interest rate we want. Right? We could say, I would like this to be the interest rate. So what I would do is I would just decrease the money supply until that became the interest rate. Okay? So we can think about the central bank as controlling the money supply. We can also think about the central bank as controlling the interest rate. And typically that's the way we say it. You'll see in the newspapers, you'll see the ECB increased the interest rate by 4 basis points or whatever, by some amount, by 0.5%, say. It's ECB increased the interest rate by 0.5%. Now, it makes it feel like they have some rule that says you have to charge this interest rate, this is the interest rate, but it's not that at all. All they've got, not all they've got, but the vast majority of what they're doing is changing the money supply. And they just change the money supply until the interest rate comes out the way they want it. Okay? So the sort of jargon in the talk in the press makes it feel like the central bank sort of controls, and they have a lever that says interest rate, and they just control that lever. There's some law that says that is the interest rate, but it's not that way at all. The interest rate is whatever banks want to charge each other, right? But the central bank can control the money supply so that what banks want to charge each other comes out to whatever the central bank wants it to be. Right? They can shift this money supply back and forth to get whatever interest rate they want. And that's how it's talked about. And the reason that's how it's talked about is because if they said in the newspaper, the central bank decreased the money supply by 50 billion euros. That says nothing to anybody. Nobody knows what that number is. Not even the central bank really cares. Like somebody in the central bank knows, but nobody really cares how many euros are in the economy. What we do care about is the interest rate. The interest rate is something that's going to have a direct effect on people's lives. And it's not only like you don't have to be a professional central bank watcher to know about the interest rate, right? People who have borrowed for a house know how much their payments are going to change if the interest rate goes up by 0.5%, right? And you can calculate, okay, I have to pay $1,400 now I'll have to pay $1,495. You say, okay, I'm paying $95 extra a month because the interest rate went up. And that's a number that means something to people. Certainly means something to business people, but means something to ordinary people too, right? And in fact, that's the way the central bank thinks about it as well. They're thinking, if we increase the interest rate by 0.5%, how is that going to change investment? And that's really a decision about how much does it cost to borrow versus how much benefit do you get by building a factory and so on. And so really what they're caring about is the interest rate. What they control is the money supply, but they can use that to pick whichever interest rate they want. So in the meetings, in the central bank meetings, they will discuss what do you think the interest rate should be next month. And they'll talk about it in terms of interest rates. And then they'll tell the open market people, do open market sales until the interest rate hits 4.5. Right? And those guys will start selling bonds until the interest rate. And they'll know how many bonds that has to be to more or less make it up. But they don't think in terms of the money supply. They think in terms of interest rates. Everyone else thinks in terms of interest rates, but it's important to be aware that what they're controlling directly is not interest rates. What they're controlling directly is the money supply, and they use that to get the interest rate to turn out how they want it to turn out. Okay, I need to let you go, and we'll continue here next time.